afternoon, everyone. Good evening. I guess we can start now. My name is Omolade Adumbi. I'm the Professor of Afro-American African Studies and Director of the African Studies Center. So I'm delighted to have everyone here today and also those who are joining us virtually. So welcome to our second in the series of UMAPS 4 Colloquium series. And we're grateful to those who are also joining us virtually from here and around the world, particularly from the continent of Africa. But before I introduce our scholars who are sharing their research with us today, I would like to begin by acknowledging many of those who made the presence of these excellent scholars possible for us at Michigan. So the Office of the President of the University, the Provost Office, Department of Afro-American African Studies, Center for Global Health Equity, College of Engineering, and Center for Reproductive and Integrated Health Training. I hope I got that right. So thanks everyone for your support. And we are also grateful to many of our colleagues who are serving as hosts and collaborators to these scholars. So we thank you too. And more importantly, our appreciation goes to their family and loved ones at home for letting them share their wealth of experience with us at Michigan. So to begin with, I'll first introduce all our scholars, and their presentation will be made in the order in which they are going to be introduced. Each scholar will have 20 minutes to present their work, and all the presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. For those online, please use the raise hand button to signify your intention to ask a question, and there will be someone monitoring the platform to let us know that you want to ask a question. So at the end of our session today, there will be light refreshments, which is going to be around the corner to my right there. So now to our scholars. Our first presenter is Dr. Samuel Boahen. Dr. Boahen is a lecturer in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Ghana. He holds a PhD in Mechanical Engineering from Habnat National University, South Korea. His research interest involves the design and optimization of energy-efficient heating and cooling systems. He also has a special interest in the development of test standards and fault detection and diagnosis mechanisms for thermal systems. And at the University of Michigan here, Dr. Boahen is working with Professor Panos Papalambros in the College of Engineering on developing efficiently integrated crop irrigation and energy subsystem models for a community in Ghana using both engineering and economic principles. But this afternoon, Dr. Boahen's presentation is going to be on what if disaster strikes? Resilience, optimization of the water energy food nexus system in Ghana. Next is Thembelihle Luthuli. Thembelihle Luthuli is a lecturer at the School of Built Environment and Development Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. She received a master's in population studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where she is also presently a PhD candidate. Her research interest is at the intersection of socio-epidemiology, population health, indigenous knowledge systems, population dynamics, and sustainable development in sub-Saharan Africa. And here at the University of Michigan, she's working with Professor Lindsay Kobayashi of the School of Public Health on a project aimed at understanding depression in the isiZulu-speaking population of South Africa using a mixed methods. But this afternoon, she's going to be presenting a paper on depression literacy in a rural isiZulu-speaking population in South Africa. And finally, Rodwell Makombe. Dr. Makombe is an associate professor in the Department of English, Literary and Cultural Studies at the University of Free State, South Africa. He received his PhD in comparative literature at the University of Fort Hare, South Africa in 2012. He is a rated researcher of the National Research Foundation of South Africa. And in 2018, Dr. Makombe received the African Humanities Program Fellowship funded by the American Council of Learned Societies. His research focuses on post-colonial literary studies, social media, and crisis literature. At Michigan, he has been collaborating with Professor Justine Davis of the Department of Afro-American African Studies and Political Science while working on a book project tentatively titled Cultures of Resistance in Post-Mugabe Zimbabwe, Social Media, Comedy, and Dissent. Dr. Mugabe, I said Dr. Mugabe, no, not Mugabe. Dr. Makombe's presentation today is titled Change Without Change, the Specter of Mugabeism in Kapfupi and Marabha's comic videos of the post-Mugabe's era. Please join me in welcoming these excellent scholars to our midst today. So first is Dr. Samuel Boahen.
Thank you very much, Professor Adumbi. Good evening to us all. I'm elated to be here to share my work with you all. This evening, I'll be sharing with you the resilience optimization of the water energy food nexus system. And I ask a very simple question. What if disaster strikes? When I entered, one of my colleagues said, I hope this is not a prophecy. It's not a prophecy. What if disaster strikes? So I'll go with you through this content. First of all, I will try and introduce what the water energy food nexus system is. I would share with you the problem we are trying to solve, and then I'll discuss a few objectives of this study. Then we would go through the literature we have looked at, discuss the methods we are using with you, and then share some results with you also, and then we will conclude the study. Now, water is very important. I don't know who has not taken water today. Everyone might have drunk water directly or indirectly, right? Someone is even sipping one now. It's very important. We can't do without water. All living organisms need water in one way or the other. Because of that, the United Nations says that we should look at clean water and sanitation. It has become one of the SDGs of the United Nations. When you move away from water, you're looking at food. In fact, when I was coming, I tried to eat something so I can get energy to do the presentation. Food is very important. You can't go without food. You need to eat. Because of that, we need to be sure there is no food insecurity. And the United Nations says that we should focus on zero hunger so that people can get the energy to work. Now, apart from food, one other interesting and important thing we need as humans is energy. In fact, everything we're doing here today boils down to energy. I'm able to present, I'm able to speak to you because we have energy. If there's energy cuts, everything goes wayward. Therefore, we also want to look at getting affordable and clean energy, even as we move along with what we do in our lives. Now, these things I've mentioned, water, food, energy, are related. You can't cook your food without water. You can't cook your food without energy. You can't get clean water without energy. So all these things are interrelated. And because of the relationship between them, we call this as the water energy food nexus. Okay, thank you very much. Now, I want to focus on food. This is a delicious, I don't know if it's an African food or an American food, right? Yeah. But we can get this primarily from the farm, from crops. You grow your crops, they get to a maturity stage, you cut them, you process them into food. We can also get the fish you see there, is it grilled? From some fish pond or maybe from the sea, right? And then we can also get food from livestock. We all eat meat, cattle, beef, pork. We get them from livestock. So primarily, if you want to get food, then these primary sources of food are very important. We need to find ways of protecting these primary sources of food. However, there seems to be a very big problem. Naturally, if you are not careful, if you have your farm, if you have the fishing system, if you have the livestock system, there can be some shocks or disasters that will strike. For instance, you can have your crop, your farm. You wake up one day, you go to the farm, and there's flooding. It sweeps away all that you have planted. You lose everything. And if you're a farmer, I bet you when you go back home, you are going to cry because you are losing a lot of money. There can also be a time where there is drought. So the whole of the year it's not raining. Those of us from Ghana in 1983, we had this experience. The whole year it didn't rain. Farmers had planted, invested so much in their crops. You go to the farm and it is like this. You lose so much money, right? When you are losing money, people are going to go hungry also because there won't be food to eat. Then in some countries, there is so much heat waves such that all the moisture in the soil are going to evaporate. And so the plant doesn't have enough moisture to grow. And that becomes a huge problem. There has been times when you wake up in the morning, there's rain, you go to your farm excited, and when you go, the wind has blown away everything. I remember when I was young, we used to have some plantain farm, and these things used to happen a lot. You go there, and then you come back home very sad because you've lost so much money. 2 years ago, I did a backyard garden in my home back in Ghana. I planted maize. Every morning I wake up, I go to the backyard, I look at how they are growing, I get excited. And one day I went and I realized that this is happening. Some army worms had attacked the maize crop. They attack the very stalk where they grow, and they kill it. And so all your investment goes loose, right? Now, these are natural issues you cannot prevent. You don't cause them. You can't control them, and they happen. And most of these things are caused by climate change. A lot of issues are going on with climate change, causing flooding, causing drought, changing the way the rainfall patterns and everything, which we cannot control. However, there are also issues of economic challenges, especially as we are going through nowadays in the world. Things get so highly expensive that if you're a farmer, you don't have enough money to purchase, farm input and go and do your work. It becomes a problem. Sometimes there are pandemics. Imagine in the COVID era, a farmer has planted his crops, he's waiting to go and harvest. He did not know there was going to be COVID, and there is COVID. COVID hits, and they say that be on a lockdown, 3 months. Your farm is at the mercy of the weather. You are not going in there. You don't know what is happening to your crops, and you lose everything. So these are challenging issues that can happen to your crop, your farm. They affect the food we eat. They affect the water we drink. They affect the energy we get, right? Therefore, if you're a farmer, you tend to ask yourself some questions. If I'm going to plant the next year, I would want to know what type of crops should I plant so that if there is flood, if there is drought, I will be able to get my money. I will not lose anything. Do I need to install any farming systems on the field? Do I need to put in some irrigation systems? Do I need to mechanize? You tend to ask these questions, right? And then if you are going to do these things, you ask yourself the question, what are the ways I can do this so that I don't spend so much on these things, but I will get some higher profit? What would be the optimum way to do these things? So these are questions you tend to ask yourself. Now, that brings into the question, or it brings into the picture, the issue of resilience. If we want to talk about resilience, imagine that you have a system, and always this is the optimum point your system operates. This is where you get your money. Over time, you get your money in the normal sense. At a point in time until a disaster strikes. And then you begin to lose everything. Your dividends are going down, your profits are going down, your yield is going down. Now, if your system, in this case a farming system, is able to, in a matter of time, begin to rise, and then gain some form of momentum along the line, until the point where it gets back to the normal state where it was operating before the disaster struck, then we say this system is resilient. Now, the time within which your system will be able to rise from the time you have everything goes off. Energy, right? So there's disaster. Hey, am I becoming a prophet of doom? Well, I don't know.
We'll be back. about that.
Thank you very much. So I was explaining the resilience concept, and I'm saying that you can have several systems that are resilient, but the time it takes for one system to get back to its maximum normal position determines how resilient the system is. So one system can be much more resilient than the other system. Therefore, we set out to understand what resilient agriculture means to us. And then we want to develop a resilient farming system using mathematical modeling. And then we want to look at how we can optimize resilience in farming systems so that we can give the farmer some tools, that will help him to make decisions when he's going to plant his crops. Now, this study is very important because the farmer needs to understand this. Every year he makes a decision on what what crop to plant, how do I set out to get my crops planted. There's that decision that goes on every year. And the farmer should make that decision based on some informed parameters or variables he has. And we want to equip the farmer with these tools for him to be able to maximize his profit, even in the face of any disaster that can strike. The first thing we set out to do was to understand from literature what people have done based on resilience optimization. We realized that a lot of work has gone on. However, not much. I think it was only these guys, Nunes and others, who did some resilience optimization of the water, energy, food nexus system. And even with that, they focused on a regional level where their system is going to inform policy decision. They didn't consider the farmer who is at the community level. So the decision making is left to the big guy up there where the farmer does not have any tool to equip him to do that. So we're focusing on equipping the farmer on the farm in the community level to get this guy these information and tools for him to make the right decisions. So for us to achieve the very first objective, we decided to do a systematic literature review and understand what farmers or the literature says about resilient agriculture. We went through Scopus using all these search queries and refined search. We finalized on 136 papers which we studied to understand what resilience agriculture means. And then we developed a model, water, energy, food nexus system, which has a lot of input parameters that will give you some output parameter, right? And then we set out, this system has subsystems, the water, the food system, the water system, the energy subsystem. And these systems are interrelated. For instance, if I want to plant my crop, I need to know how much water to plant. And then that becomes an input parameter to the irrigation subsystem, which also would need some energy to be able to do that. It becomes an input parameter to the energy subsystem. It gives that to the irrigation subsystem as an output parameter, and then that helps the irrigation subsystem to pump the exact amount of water the crop needs to grow. And then we looked at the third objective, how we can optimize resilient systems. So we need to define what our objective function is. Is it profit? Is it yield? Then what are the constraints? How much water are we pumping? What is the energy requirement? How much money does the farmer have? And then what are the input and output variables we are going to use? What time frame are we considering? What system are we looking at? Is it the energy subsystem, the food subsystem? What shocks? Is it going to be drought? Is it when it is flooding? We need to understand all these things. And then we have to cost these parameters and then formulate a mathematical model, solve the model, so that we can get some system parameters to inform the decision-making of the farmer. So the optimization model is like this black box. We don't know what is in there. It has a lot of equations, a lot of things going on here, and then we give it some input parameters. We give it some input parameters so that it can work on that, and then we give it our constraint parameters. Is it energy, water, how much money do we have? Then when we put all these into this black box with a lot of equations, it gives us some values which informs the decision-making of the farmer. For this study, we have some partners already in Uganda, Carbon, Mobende, and Kampala, who already have given us some data, especially weather data and all that. So we decided to use the information we have from them to look at this. And then from here, we intend to extend it to Ghana and Nigeria and look at what the farmers also have to do and how they can benefit from this study. I want to share a few results with you from the literature review, systematic review we did. We realized that about 45% of studies that have been done on resilient agricultural systems have come from Europe, followed by 30% from Asia, and Africa has just about 15%. And out of these works, they focus on something we call resilience capacity. How do we define the resilience? How do we show that this system is resilient? And they define that some studies say that if you want to know a system is resilient, the system must be robust. At the same time, it must be adaptable. At the same time, it must be transformable. In robustness, we mean that when a disaster strikes, the system should be strong enough to resist or stand against the disaster. And then it should be able to adapt itself to the new changes, right? Then the system should be able to transform itself back to the normal position. So 33% of the papers say that if a farming system will be resilient, all these things should be present. All these things should be present. However, 66% of them say that no. Just the system being adaptable is okay. And so we can look at this and then use some of these parameters to design. However, in the design perspective, we want to know some measurable quantities we can cost, measurable quantities we can set into our model as input parameters, because we deal with numbers. Therefore, we studied what these farmers think resilience is. If they talk about adaptability, what are the things they are doing to show that their system is adaptable? And they said that, well, you can grow short duration crops. It will make your farming system adaptable to any form of disaster that will strike. If it is about drought, there are crops that are resistant to drought. Plant some of those crops. And then they say that you can increase the organic matter content on your farm. It's able to make you resilient. And then interestingly, they say that you can insure your crops. Go for a crop insurance, right? And as much as you insure your buildings, if you're a farmer, do some crop insurance. That will also make your system resilient. And then they say that, well, you can study the weather pattern due to climate change, and then look at how you can change your planting time and then your harvesting time. That can also make your system resilient. So for us as designers, now we are going to take this information we have here and then model them, put some parameters or values into them, and put them into that black box, and try and get some interesting values or information from that. The second and third objectives are still ongoing. We are still looking at modeling the system. What are the parameters we are going to define as our objective function? How do we model that? How do we model the optimization system? Are we looking at minimizing cost? Are we looking at maximizing yield? These are decisions we are still undertaking and working on. We hope that maybe by the close of the year, we should be able to finish this work and then get it published. So at the end of this work, we want to help the farmer make some decisions. For instance, what crop should I plant if I realize that there's going to be drought in my area? If the weather data tells me there's going to be flooding, what are the type of crops I should plant so that at the end of the year, I would get so much money and not lose? What are some of the systems I can install on the farm? Do I go for an irrigation system? How do I operate it? What should be the amount of water to pump? What should be the amount of energy to use? Do I use renewable energy on the farm? Do I use just some microgrid on the farm? These are decisions we also want to evaluate so that we can give the right information and details to the farmer. So in conclusion, we are saying that resilient farming systems are necessary. And if you want to be a productive farmer, you need to go for resilient farming systems. And there are several little farming practices you can do. They don't cost so much, which can get your farming system to be resilient. And then when we are able to develop the optimized resilient system, we want to be able to give some tools to the farmer at the community level so that the farmer will be able to make informed decisions on the type of crop to plant, on the type of systems, to use on the field, how to combine these things for him to yield higher profit and get higher yield. I want to thank the University of Michigan, my university back home, the African Studies Center, the Optimal Design Lab at the Mechanical Engineering Department, especially Prof. Papalambros, for the opportunity to work with him. And my family back home, I miss them. I know they also miss me. And all my UMAPS scholars who have been so wonderful and awesome to us. Thank you very much.
Next is Thembelihle Luthuli.
Good day, everyone. My name is Thembelihle Luthuli. I'm from South Africa. I am based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in the School of the Built Environment and Development Studies. The presentation today is based on an ongoing study that I am completing, and the title of my presentation today is Depression Literacy in a Rural isiZulu-Speaking Population in South Africa. So mental health is a priority for global health and development. This is because it has been recognized that mental disorders hinder the functioning and the quality of life of many people worldwide. Mental health has been integrated into various development agendas which many countries have adopted worldwide. In the Sustainable Development Goals, mental health has been included in goal number 3, which deals with health and well-being. And in Africa's Agenda 2063, there is a call for the improvement in the health of all Africans, and this includes mental health. And there's also a call for the realization of a safe and peaceful Africa. And this is important for mental health because in an environment which has high levels of conflict and violence, which unfortunately is commonplace in Africa, there is an increased risk for the development of mental disorders. The mental disorder, which is the focus of the study, is depression. Depression is a common and serious mood disorder where sufferers may experience feelings of sadness, loneliness, and they may lose interest in all their daily activities. Depression has a high burden of disease worldwide. I'm going to show you a few results from the Global Burden of Disease study from 2019, which illustrate this. So if we look at this bottom left-hand corner, that's where we see depression. And globally, depression is the 3rd leading cause of disability. In sub-Saharan Africa, once again, depression is down here in the left-hand corner. There is a large block here, but if we look across, all the mental disorders are here, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, conduct disorder, anxiety disorder, and mental disorders as a whole are the #1 cause of years lived with disability in sub-Saharan Africa, with depression being the highest contributor. In South Africa, there's still a high burden of disease from depression, where depression is the 2nd leading cause of years lived with disability in South Africa. And in South Africa, it has also been estimated that 1 in 3 people will develop a mental disorder in their lifetime. Now looking at KwaZulu-Natal, which is a province within South Africa, where our study area is taken, depression, once again, is the 2nd leading cause of the years lived with disability, and this comes after HIV. The province of KwaZulu-Natal has a high prevalence of HIV, and this is important to be mentioned now because untreated mental disorders can have an effect on other health outcomes. And in this case, research has shown that people who are depressed are more likely to default on their treatment regime. So people who are depressed are more likely to default on antiretroviral treatment, which is detrimental for HIV infection management. So one of the solutions that have been proposed to address these poor mental health outcomes is to increase mental health literacy in a population. So the relationship between literacy and health outcomes is well documented in literature. When I speak of literacy here, I'm talking about functional literacy, which is the ability to read and write. Research shows that people who are literate have better health outcomes when compared to people who are illiterate. So the interest in the relationship between literacy and health outcomes led to the development of the concept of health literacy. So health literacy is the ability to obtain and translate knowledge for the improvement of health. Health literacy encompasses both functional literacy, the ability to read and write, plus critical literacy. So we would like individuals to be able to obtain information through reading and writing, and then use critical literacy skills to translate that knowledge so that they can make informed decisions and take action to improve their health. From the domain of health literacy, the concept of mental health literacy was developed as a response for the lack of attention that is given to mental health disorders. So mental health literacy is the beliefs and knowledge that facilitate the recognition, management, or prevention of mental disorders or psychological distress. Health literacy and mental health literacy also advocate that individuals should be able to obtain information in a language that they understand. So this is also one of the motivations to do the study in an isiZulu-speaking population, given the diversity of the South African population, where there are a number of languages which are spoken. This is just a table to give you a picture of the literacy in South Africa. As we can see, the African race group here at the top contributes to the highest share of the population who are illiterate, and this goes back to the legacy of apartheid in South Africa, where the African race group has been the most disadvantaged. And this is the race group that continues to have the poorest outcomes in terms of socioeconomic status, health, and education. So the objective of the study is to investigate the level of depression literacy in a rural isiZulu-speaking population in South Africa. The data and methods that were used are 24 semi-structured in-depth interviews were performed. The inclusion criteria for the interviews were the person had to be isiZulu-speaking, South African of the African race group, a resident of the Ndwedwe municipality, which is the rural area, and they could be a male or female, adults 18 years and above. And the sampling that was used was opportunistic sampling and snowball sampling. You will note here that the sample of the study is small, as this is a novel study to gain information power and to bring new insight into the subject so that further studies can be conducted. The interviews that were conducted were in a vignette style. A vignette is a short story about a hypothetical person. So in the study, the respondents were presented with 2 vignettes, and these vignettes depicted a person who is suffering from depression. And these vignettes conformed to the diagnostic criteria, which is presented in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, version 5. So on the screen, we have the mild depression vignettes, which I'll read quickly. So everything is getting on top of Max, who feels like escaping from it all. There seem to be many problems: study, work, relationships, and family. Max is desperate to do well, but can't concentrate on anything anymore. Max lays awake at night worrying about things, and when morning comes, feels unable to face the day. Once the vignette was read to a respondent, then the following question would be asked: if they were Max, what would they think, if anything, is wrong with them? And this is some statistics about the study area. So this is Ndwedwe. This is a rural area. You can see that the population is quite small at 140,000. In this area, there's high unemployment rate, and we can also see that residents in this area have very little access to basic needs such as running water and electricity. Now I will present some of the findings from the study. Firstly, when looking at identification of depression from the vignette, there was very poor identification of depression. From the mild depression vignette, 10% of the male participants and 10% of the female participants were able to identify depression. In the severe depression vignette, none of the male participants were able to identify depression, while 10% of the female participants were able to identify depression. There was a high level of misrecognition, where most respondents felt that the person in the vignette was dealing with a lot of stress, but that stress was temporary and they just needed to live through it, and then their life would go back to normal. Another point from the respondents is that they felt that the person in the vignette was not experiencing any illness because they believe that an illness is one that you can see physically on a person's body. Under the recognition of when a disorder is developing, the respondents reported that they have had a similar experience as the person in the vignette, and some of the reasons that they gave for going through some distress is bereavement or romantic heartbreak. Under the knowledge of risk factor and causes, respondents felt that the primary cause of the depression or the challenges that the person in the vignette is facing is that they are not sharing their problems. They are not talking to anyone. The participants believe that a person who doesn't share their problems and bottles them up becomes increasingly isolated from friends and family and end up spending a lot of time in their rooms. And they believe that to avoid this problem, people needed to talk about their problems. Continuing on the knowledge of risk factors and causes, on the question of whether males or females are more likely to experience the problem in the vignette, respondents felt that was an equal risk for males and females. The female respondents were more likely to say that females are more likely to experience the problems as the person in the vignette because they said that females are known to overthink and they dwell on their problems, and that females are over-emotional. The male respondents were more likely to state that a male is more likely to have the problems as depicted in the vignette. They said that males are conditioned to not show emotion, and they themselves admitted to having pressure to being the perfect man in society. And they believe that the ideal or perfect man in society is a man who is always strong. Under knowledge of health-seeking options and treatments available, the respondents indicated that they have a level of trust in formal sources of help. Respondents mentioned that they would refer a friend or a person who needed help to a psychologist or a therapist. However, they did not have a clear understanding of what exactly a psychologist or a therapist was or the kind of work that they do. They also expressed a challenge in accessing formal help, where many respondents attributed this to their rural location. Under skills to support others affected by mental health problems, all the respondents stated that they are willing to befriend a person or a neighbor who is in distress, such as the person in the vignette. They placed a high value on social support as they believe that if people are supported, then they are able to work through any problems that they face. So to conclude, this study is still ongoing, but from the findings, I can see that there is substantial room for improvement in the area of depression literacy. The findings show that there is a lack of knowledge of depression and a lack of knowledge in appropriate health-seeking behavior. None of the respondents mentioned any lifestyle changes such as diet, exercise, or sleep, which can assist in the prevention and management of depression. But all the respondents said that they would support friends or neighbors who they felt were in distress. So as the study is in progress, I do not have any recommendations to share, but I welcome any contribution. But to close, I would like to share this, which speaks to our daily behavior in our lives. So we have this question that we ask each other every day, which is, how are you? And unfortunately, this question has sometimes become a rhetorical question, where the person who asked the question is not waiting for a response from the person that they're asking, or that they do not have time to acknowledge the response from the person that they are asking. So today I want you to leave with a thought to think more carefully about this question, and when asking this question, ask it sincerely and be willing to listen. Thank you for your time.
Right. Next is Dr. Makombe, Rodwell Makombe.
Thank you, Prof. Omlade. I think mine is a lighter presentation. I'm going to talk to you on that topic there. I'm focusing specifically on comedy, comic skits to be specific, which are posted by Zimbabwean comedians on social media, particularly YouTube. And goodness. Oh, it could be from somewhere else, right? Because I don't think I pressed anything.
The comedians don't want you to show them.
Okay, all right, so yes, you can play it, it's fine. I was thinking that I could do it later, but it's okay. We can have that at the beginning.
Problem. Marabha is common yippee. Blankata. Yippee. Motorbike. Was it a motorbike? Gave you Marabha, gave you. Kana speed. Another cave, kana speed. Tangasira kurumiza kusika. Yako hambu. Hambu, ona hambu. Yero metangu ya don. Nga jamba hambuga. You see? You see? Boys, drive safely. Drive safely. Aye. So, motorbike yacho baba. Sikuona motorbike. Motorbike yacho Yamuna Wura na motorbike yacho irikupia. Yamamchi jamba mahambu na. Driver na Marabha. Abane. Abane. Abane.
Okay, I think if you come from any African country, try to see how you can apply that to your own context. I will explain that a bit later. Okay, so I'm talking about the issue of change without change, and I think that is what is depicted in that comic skit, right? And if you look at the second part of my presentation, is the specter of Mugabeism. Zimbabwe has been ruled by one president for 37 years. We only had our second president in 2017 through a coup. So replacing a big man is very difficult. You can talk about change, but the culture, the political philosophies of the big men will remain. So that is what I'm referring to as the specter of Mugabeism. It's almost like a ghost of this big man that becomes very difficult to exorcise. You know, no matter what you do, you always find the culture coming in. Even those that replace him, the only political framework that they know is the framework that has been left by the big man. So even if they want to do a new thing, they always find themselves sort of by default becoming like Robert Mugabe. Okay, so these are the aims. This project comes from a book that I published in 2021, which was last year, on cultural texts of resistance. And this time around, when I was finishing writing that book at the end, in the conclusion, I realized that there are actually now cultures of resistance. And in that particular book, I was talking about cultural texts, specifically focusing on things like memes, music, and I realized that there has been, you know, a discernible increase in music, in memes, in all sorts of cultural productions that are seeking to resist the governance systems in Zimbabwe. And then I was focusing on the texts themselves. Now I'm actually focusing on the cultures. It's almost like there's now a culture of dissent within the Zimbabwean body politic. So the aims of this particular paper, or a chapter actually, in the book that I'm working on cultures of resistance. First, I want to look at how these comic skits represent everyday life in Zimbabwe. Secondly, I want to look at how they contest narratives of the governing regime, because the issue of narrative is a very important one in Zimbabwe, because when things aren't going wrong, you want to be able to, when things are going wrong, you want to be able to control the narrative, be able to say, you know, things are going right when they are not, you know, to say there's no crisis when there is. So these comic skits are actually contesting those narratives that are being peddled by the governing regime. And then lastly, I want to see how these comic skits advocate alternative ways of imagining or narrating the nation, because the nation is always narrated by those that are in power, but these ones also are trying to narrate the nation in their own way. So that is Zimbabwe, the country that I'm talking about. And I thought I should give you a brief context to this country. There's a lot that has happened there, but I will start in 2000 with the land reform. We had a land reform. I think the best way to describe the land reform is to call it land invasions. Because when we say land reform, it gives a picture that this is something that was planned. Our land reform was not planned. We just overnight, you know, saw people walking into farms. So like you have a farm, and then one morning you wake up, there are people at the gate. They're telling you to leave. Your farm is full of crops you haven't harvested. You run away. If you don't, they will kill you. Then they take over the farm, they harvest. That's actually what happened. So that was the land reform. So the land reform led to, I mean, it was not only the land reform, there were many other problems that had started before that. But the land reform worsened the situation in the country in terms of the economy. So we began to have an economic crisis, which involves things like 90% unemployment, which means almost everyone is not employed in the country except for those who are working for government. Then you have things like hyperinflation. We don't have a currency in Zimbabwe, actually. There's no money as Zimbabwean currency. We are using what we call bond notes. So you can imagine the kind of crisis. We are using the US dollar, actually. That's the currency that is working, but there's also that bond note. So I'm just trying to give you a picture of the kind of crisis that we have in the country. And we've always had, since 2000, contested elections. There's never an election which was not contested. And the main reason is that the governing party has not actually cleanly won an election for 20 years. They've always won it through other means. They've always won elections. So in 2017, there was a coup which ousted Robert Mugabe. But this coup was done by people within his own party, a faction within his own party, which speaks to the issue of change without change, right? So you have individuals, because Mugabe was getting old. By the time he was deposed, he was 93, still in power for 37 years. So when he was removed, he was, trying to set up his wife to become the next president. So the current president was connected to the military, and because Mugabe wanted to set up his wife, he decided to dismiss. He was actually the vice president, the guy who was dismissed at the time. So he dismissed him and he ran away to South Africa. But because he had connections with the military just told him that, oh, go away, we are going to sort out this matter, and then we'll call you back. And in no time, in a week's time, they had removed Mugabe, put him under house arrest, and called that gentleman back. Okay, and when he came back, he started to talk about a new dispensation. Zimbabwe has turned a new leaf. Now we have a new dispensation. But this new dispensation has got ministers who have been in Robert Mugabe's government since 1980, including himself, the president, the current president. He was actually Mugabe's right-hand man since the 1970s, during the liberation struggle. So he is talking now of a new dispensation, a second republic, controlling the narrative now, making Zimbabweans believe that things have changed. Oh. Okay, so this, I'm just trying to give you a picture of the kind of crisis that is going on in Zimbabwe, right? This is actually a cartoon that is based on an incident that happened, and I think my colleague here from South Africa can identify with this. Because there's so much of a crisis in Zim, I mean, it's very difficult, I think, in this short presentation to give you a picture of the crisis that is in that country. But you have a country that doesn't have a functional health system, to a point where if you go to a hospital, you can't even get a painkiller. It's not possible. There's no one cancer machine that works in Zimbabwe. So that's the extent of the crisis. So when people fall sick, they cross over to South Africa, the neighboring country. So there was an incident when this lady there is an MEC in Limpopo province, which is close to Zimbabwe. So she went to a hospital and she found a Zimbabwean lady there who was being treated and she was sick. So she asked her questions, where are you from? She first asked it in a language that is spoken in that area, but this lady could not understand it. Then eventually the MEC realized she was from Zimbabwe. And then she had to say, oh, you guys, you are putting pressure on our health system. And the video was recorded and it went viral. So the cartoon is based on that incident. She's actually now saying, because it was now a call to say, Zimbabweans who are getting treatment from South Africa, the government must actually pay for that treatment that they're getting. So this lady is now delivering that slip. And you can see how, if you have a slip like that in a shop, it means you have broken a bank. So she's handing it over to the new president. Okay, I will talk about the scarf later on. So the theory, here I just wanted to give you an idea of how we do research in my field, because most of you are not necessarily in my field. In my field, we tend to see everything as a text, even yourselves. So when I meet you, you are a text, I read you, I interpret you, I make sense of you. Okay, so that's what I mean. So the world itself is a text. And we do this all the time. This theory is speaking about things we do all the time, right? Everywhere you go, you look at things, you make sense of them. In other words, the same way you read a book, you read the environment. When we came here, we got busy reading the American society, reading American culture, you know? And then we started talking to ourselves, oh, this is how they do things, okay? So the world is a text. But also, the text itself is the world. So in my field, when we read the text, we get to understand the world. My colleagues in science would want to go to the world itself. We don't go to the world, we go through to the text to understand the world. So when we read a story, we understand the lives of real people who are living in particular communities. So this is the kind of theoretical framing that I'm using in this study. And I'm using specifically those two concepts, the notion of textual exercises and ambivalent mockery. The idea of nations as textual exercises comes from post-colonial theory. And the basic idea is that, you know, a nation is not only a geographical entity, it is also a discursive construct. It's a rhetorical entity. Nations are constructed through words, through symbols, through images. So, for example, when, you know, colonialism happened, geographical territories were demarcated and given new names and new street names. So that if we were living in that particular geographical space before it was colonized, we wouldn't even recognize it after it was colonized. What changed is now the naming, you know, which is the discursive construction of that nation, okay? And then the second one, it speaks to ambivalent mockery. It's also a concept that comes from post-colonial theory. It speaks about the way in which comedy is, it's very difficult. There's there's many layers to comedy. It doesn't have a single meaning. When you're interpreting comedy, you always find that you get this meaning. Tomorrow you look at the same comedy, there is also another layer. You know, it criticizes maybe the political elite, but also it criticizes the ordinary people. So it's very difficult for you to pin down a single meaning. And then the method that I used an ethnography, which is a virtual ethnography. I know my prof uses ethnography as a method, right? So here I used an ethnography. So instead of going to interview real people in real communities, I go online, I browse, you know, YouTube videos, then I select the ones I wanted to use. And the period I focused on, because I'm focusing particularly on the post-Mugabe dispensation, so it starts in 2017 to the present moment. So I identified only 6 comic skits. I've shown you one. I identified 5 comic skits, rather. I've shown you one. I don't think I will show you the other 3 if I have time. I mean the other 4. If I have time, I can show you one, just a bit so you can get a picture of what I'm talking about here. Okay, and this is why I chose to look at comedy, or this is what comedy does, okay? It questions prescribed meanings that already exist in a particular society. It also, you know, holds a mirror. It helps people to actually, you know, check themselves. When you see a comedy about yourself, you begin to say, okay, what am I doing wrong? Or how can I do things better? And it also communicates sensitive political issues, which people cannot really communicate, especially in repressive regimes. And then lastly, it reflects everyday realities in society. Okay, I want to have an opportunity to go to my, something has gone wrong again. Oh, there. Okay, so here I just wanted, this is a brief history of Zimbabwe. But the reason I'm giving you this brief history is because I want to talk about this idea of change in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is a country that has not experienced any significant change, actually, since 1980. For those who once visited the country in the 80s, if you go there, you wouldn't see anything different, actually. If anything, where there was a road, you might find that there isn't a road anymore. So there hasn't been change. But it's a country where there is a lot of talking about change. There is a lot of rhetoric of change. So at every moment, at every decisive moment in the history of Zimbabwe, there is always talk. People are talking about change. Beginning in 1980 itself, when we got independence, there was a lot of talking about change. You know, when people were fighting the war, they were being told that when we get our liberation, everything will be different. It will be an equal society. All these farms are going to be ours. We're going to be producing our own food. We're not going to be hungry anymore. And when we got independent, that did not happen. That change did not come. In fact, what we got immediately after the independence was a civil war. Two liberation movements that were fighting for freedom are now fighting between themselves, obviously, for the national cake. So we didn't have and then, 1993, that is the war. Then 1990s, we have the structural economy, the ESAP, we know about ESAP, right? Economic Structural Adjustment Programs, which means now we know in Africa what happened with those programs, right? So for a whole decade, from 1990 to 2000, we are now having retrenchments, inflation because of all that. So there's no change. And then in 1999, because also since 1980 in Zimbabwe, there was never a significant opposition party. It was almost like a one-party state. It was only in 1990 that we had 1999, that's when we had a new political party, a proper viable opposition, which was named Movement for Democratic Change. So you see again the idea of change. People are tired of Robert Mugabe, they want something new, right? And then 2000, I've already spoken about the invasions. And then 2017, we have the new dispensation, already also promising change. Then immediately after the new dispensation is formed, we have another new opposition party which comes from that one. Okay, that one got dissolved because it was kind of, the leaders were bought by the ruling party, so it dissolved. Then this is now the legitimate party in Zimbabwe, opposition party, which is called Citizens Coalition for Change. So again, the idea of change. Okay, everyone wants change. So I'm looking at comic skits by these two. These guys are not educated, right? One went up to grade 7, the other one up to Form 2. And they are living in an informal settlement. So they are not only doing comedy about the lives of Zimbabweans, but also about their own lives, because they actually don't have money, okay? One of them fell sick recently, and then he had to ask money from well-wishers. He didn't have money to take care of himself, okay? Now, going back to I will just talk about that skit that you have seen, right? So what is going on in that skit is that you have the new Zimbabwe, right? Which is, in that skit is the concrete culvert where those two men, these ones, are sitting on, right? One is this is an imaginary motorbike. It actually means that this motorbike does not exist. It only exists rhetorically. It exists in the imaginations of those that are riding it. So this is actually an image of the new Zimbabwe, which does not exist. And it's moving very fast. And the one who is the one who is driving it is actually is reckless. Okay, he does not care about the welfare of the passengers. You can see the passenger is crying that there's too much speed, you must reduce speed. But he does not care. He wants to arrive early. So this is a picture of the new regime that has taken over after Robert Mugabe. Okay, it wants to bring change, but as it does that, it doesn't care about the welfare of the ordinary citizens. Okay, so that is a picture. But you can also think about this new Zimbabwean narrative, as a dummy. It's like we've been sold a dummy. That's what it is saying. Okay, this thing does not exist. It's not there. Okay, we just hear about it from the politicians. And then the other one that I wanted to show you, which I'm not going to show you because he has shown me 5 minutes left. In this one, it's quite interesting because we have one small building, right? And then these two comedians, one is inside. This building in South Africa, you would call it a tuck shop. So one is inside the tuck shop. Then the other one comes to the tuck shop, he wants to buy something. And then when he says, do you have bread in the tuck shop? This one inside comes out and says, oh, are you mad? You are looking for bread here. This is a saloon. So he starts beating him up because you are looking for, and then this one, oh, you are saying this is a saloon. Okay, go inside. I want to buy something now. So this one goes into this building, which is now a saloon. So when the other one goes inside, the other one wants to buy, hair chemicals, and says, oh, you want to buy here? This is not a hair salon. It's actually a beer hall, this. So what that cartoon, that comic skit is actually talking about is this, and that small building is dilapidated. It's full of cracks. What only changes is the name. this building, which is very old, run down, every time you go to eat, you want to buy something, it takes a new name. It's now a beer hall, it's now sometimes a saloon, sometimes it's a church office. It changes. So that is the idea of a new Zimbabwe. Nothing has actually changed. The building is the same, but it's the name that changes. And it's someone who says it is now a beer hall. It is now a saloon. And if you don't believe it, they beat you so that you can believe it. Okay, because my time is up, so this is exactly what I was explaining to you, right? So you didn't lose anything because of my time is up. So in conclusion, what these comedies are doing is they are capturing particular moments, which is something that probably historians will not be able to do. Capturing particular moments in Zimbabwean history, contemporary moments, right at the time that they happen. And also offering alternative narratives, because when you live in a dictatorship, you can't, because also in Zimbabwe, we must remember that we only have one TV station, which is owned by the state, right? All the national newspapers, they are owned. When we say state in Zimbabwe, we mean the ruling party. That's the state, okay? There's no difference. Those guys control everything. So you can't be able to control narrative if you cannot control media. So these skits are giving us an opportunity to know the other side of the story. So they present alternative narratives. And they also capture, because remember, one thing that people who loved Mugabe is that they actually don't know that Mugabe did not achieve much in Zimbabwe. He was a very good orator, right? When he goes on the global stage, he speaks for every marginalized person. And even myself, I used to like his speeches. But that's what they were, just his speeches. Nothing was going on in Zimbabwe, actually, when he was giving those nice speeches. So these comedies help us to capture those moments. And then lastly, they actually say to us that this so-called new Zimbabwe does not exist. It's mere rhetoric. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. All right, thank you very much. So, scholars, please take a seat, and it's now time for questions. And please turn on your microphone.
I have to go then.
Oh, you don't? Do you have a microphone? Okay. All right, so now we can take your questions. And those who are with us online, please use the raise hand button to indicate that you want to ask a question, and we'll read out your questions. So we'll take
those who want to ask a question here, you need to wait for the microphone so that the people online can hear you.
Okay. So we'll take a couple of questions, then ask our scholars to answer those questions, then we'll come back to take more questions. So we'll keep going until we get to the end, when we'll go for a refreshment and have an opportunity to interact with our presenters. All right, so who's going to go first? And please introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, my name is Liv Schaefer, and I have a question for Ms. Luthuli. I know that the vignette you read over was depicting mild depression. How might the identification or response of your interviewees change if the vignette was more about severe depression or someone experiencing like physical manifestations of depression?
Okay, all right.
My name is Joseph Siaka. I'm a UMAPS scholar. I have a question for Samuel. During the COVID pandemic outbreak in Africa, there were models that were predicted as to how damaging or how severe COVID would have been. And what ordinary people get to understand is that all these predictions are being made. They do not consider the inputs into those models. For example, so they accused Bill Gates and his wife as predicted severe COVID with people dying in the streets. My question to you is that what safeguards are you putting into place so that the models that you are building do not become either overly pessimistic or overly optimistic?
Thank you. One more question.
Thank you so much. My name is Anna, and I'm also part of the UMAPS program. The question is directed to Samuel, and one of my main questions is that what is the issues of land, especially regarding your project in Ghana? And last one to Lihle is that would you be able to explain further your theoretical perspective and link regarding mental health in relations to the language aspect, especially that you're dealing with isiZulu language and how it relates to young people, I would assume, looking into issues of mental health, and how do you link that using a specific theory on depression and mental health?
All right, thank you. We'll start with Samuel.
All right, thank you very much for your comment and questions. Joseph wanted to inquire about the safeguards we're putting in place to ensure that the model is effective. One of the things you'd want to do, it is true, in fact, in most cases, a lot of people tend to believe in experimental works more than models, because we think this is just, some mathematical stuff. And that is why I spoke about the fact that when you have designed a model, you need to go to the real issues and get data. So you need real data from the field. Therefore, you need to get some case study. And so we're using the Ugandan situation where all the information we are looking at, weather data, everything, will be from the field and not an imaginary thing. I think 2 weeks or so ago, we tested the initial model we had, and then we're getting a profit of about $45,000 per year for a farmer. And then one of our reps in Uganda, who is a professor in Makerere, said that, well, these values the model is giving us might not be true, because I don't think any Ugandan farmer gets $45,000 a year. So let me go back and check. And then when he came, I said, oh, they quoted values of around $1,000, $2,000. Right? So the land you are using, the irrigation pumps you are using, all those values you are going to use in the model must be real values from the field. Also, when you finish with the model, you need to do some sensitivity analysis to check if your system is sensitive to real issues. So sometimes you want to say that, okay, my system will be able to give you solutions of around maybe plus or minus 5%, So you give room for some of these things to make sure that your system is okay. On the issue of land, currently we are looking at a normal land size in Uganda, about 4 acres of land for the model. But the model is flexible at any point in time, depending on the farmer's land size. You'll be able to change the land size in the model and get a correct prediction for your work.
All right. Litle.
Okay, for the first question, the respondents were given 2 vignettes, one on mild depression and one on severe depression. But in their responses for the severe depression, they still, the majority was still not able to identify depression, only 10% of the females. So this is one of the striking findings in my study, which I feel I need a further detailed study to understand fully why the participants are not able to identify depression. And this also links up with the second question about the framework and language. So the framework that was used in the study is Jorm's framework. Professor Jorm is part of the team that pioneered the concept of mental health literacy. So in the study, this framework was applied as it was developed and translated into isiZulu. but due to the fact that respondents were unable to identify isiZulu, this has prompted me to want to develop a further study to understand why that is, and maybe we'll find that this is not the appropriate method that needs to be used in the African context.
Thank you. More questions? Are there questions online? Okay, can you read the question out?
There's a question online. So this question is from a former UMAPS scholar, Usisipo Feleni from South Africa, and it's to Luthuli. Since 2020, mental health cases, depression have increased drastically due to COVID-19. It is continuously increasing till date. How will your work assist in ensuring that mental health reduces not only for Zulu Nation, and which implementation are you considering from the National Development Plan 2030?
Okay. Diva? Right here? Okay. Right.
Thank you. Hi, Justine Davis. I have a question for Rodwell. Do you think, or do you have evidence that the government actually responds to some of these comedies that are kind of coded in their way of talking about the government, but it's kind of clear that they're being critical? Do you see YouTube channels being shut down, or the government kind of engaging with these comedies that are critical of them?
All right, one more here.
Another question for Dr. Luthuli.
Name?
Oh, sorry. My name's Divya. I know that in the US there's been some talk about how the DSM-5 and the diagnostic criteria associated with it have kind of failed to diagnose mental health issues in minority communities, specifically non-white communities. Is that a problem that you ran into in your research at all?
Okay. Yep. One more question, and this is to Rodwell. So are these internet sites regulated in Zimbabwe? Since you mentioned that the state controls the electronic and print media, what about social media platforms? Okay, let's start with Luthuli.
Okay, for the first question concerning the increase of mental health challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, and what my research can bring into that. Well, since this is a novel study, I was saying this was just to gain information power, but there is a need to expand to do a study on all of the language groups that are available in South Africa in order to formulate strategies which will help all of the South African population. And for the second question about the DSM-5, I have not come across that, as in my study I was not diagnosing depression. I have not worked on that side. My research was just looking at the public's knowledge of mental disorders.
All right.
Okay, thank you. The first question about government response. The government in Zimbabwe would really love to jail everyone who opposes it. During Mugabe's time, they would get jailed, beaten up, sometimes they just disappear. You get taken to some forest somewhere, they beat you, they dump you there. Those things have been happening. But the problem now is actually the capacity, because we're talking about, a regime that has completely collapsed. Like, they don't have the capacity. They've passed, to respond also to Prof's question about regulation of these sites. The problem is actually capacity. There is a bill which they passed not so long ago. I think they were passed when the current president came to power, which is called the Cybersecurity Bill, which is basically about trying to crack down on dissent on these platforms. But the problem is that they don't have the capacity. They wish they can do it. So occasionally, some people, and I know of individuals who have been arrested and imprisoned for circulating a WhatsApp message that is subversive. If they manage somehow to track it down to you, and I mean, they do this, like, for example, if you circulate it unknowingly to someone who is connected to the regime, then they get to know who it is, but they don't have the technical expertise to follow up these people. And another issue also is that these comedians are very cunning as well. They know how to couch their comedies in a discourse that it becomes very difficult for the regime to pin it down as subversive. So people in the community, the Zimbabweans who know what is going on, will be able to understand what the comedians are saying. And the politicians also can understand, but it's very difficult to, put up a prima facie case to say this is indeed what you are saying. Like if you see that comic that I showed you, Zimbabweans will tell you they know what's going on, but you can't take that to court.
All right, thank you. Samuel? Oh, okay. All right, we can take more questions, maybe 2 or 3 more questions then. Let's start with online.
Oh, we have an online question first. You have to read.
So this person is asking, what is depression in isiZulu?
Okay.
Thank you. I am Pierre from UMAPS. My question goes to Rodney. So, as someone who have been in Zimbabwe and you know the history of Zimbabwe and politics, and what do you suggest can change so that the change can be real change? So, yeah, that's my question.
All right, thank you. One more.
So my question is for Rodwell, and my question is, to what degree do you think the cartoons, the cartoons, memes, or social media conversations you've studied reflect Zimbabweans' political consciousness or understanding of just how limited change has been policy-wise, or are they more reflective of like stagnant material conditions?
Okay, so we'll take last question. Thank you, Andres.
Ellen Poteet in the history department. This is for Lele. You've presented sort of how respondents to those vignettes are, at least in the majority, not able to identify depression. And I'm just wondering sort of what, how they do identify it. Is it simply an absence of there's nothing really wrong, or is there another way of understanding the person and relationships that they have the language for? Is it a question of simply not having the language for the depression? And then actually, also for Rodwell, and this is related both to the question that Pierre asked and the last one, this young woman. Do you see the comedy as being in some ways a satire on Zimbabwe, the conditions in Zimbabwe, the political system? Is there ever in it the presentation of what could be an alternative and actually itself proposing some kind of change?
Thank you. So we'll start with, yeah.
Okay, for the first question about what is depression in isiZulu, the respondents who identified depression from the vignettes were asked to name depression in isiZulu. None of the participants were 100% sure about what depression is in isiZulu. One participant suggested that it was the word ingcindezi, and this word seems to be used interchangeably with stress. So this is also another point that needs further investigation in terms of having the population understand about this disease, that if there is no word for it in isiZulu, this presents another challenge. And for the question for Ellen, most of the participants identified the problem in the vignette as being stress. But in terms of using the vignette, I did find that many participants did ask for more details surrounding the story that they were given in the vignette. So I need to assess that to see that maybe other methods are needed in order to talk to these populations who do not speak English about mental health literacy.
Pierre, your question on how can we have real change. I think from what I said during the presentation, a lot of things have gone haywire in Zimbabwe, right? The economy has collapsed. The infrastructure has collapsed. Almost everything has collapsed. The only thing that is standing is the ruling party. They've been there since I've only known them as the ones governing the country since I was born. So I think the only way we can have change is when we have a new political system. Because the actual problem in Zimbabwe is that everything is politics in Zimbabwe. Everything. You know, everything can be turned into politics. So if you want to change something, I think you can't. That's why even the people who try to help the country, they can't make much progress as long as the political culture and system remains the same. Because even if you give them money, it will disappear somehow. So I think that's the real, the only thing that we need to change for us to have real change, if we are ever going to have it. Then on the question of whether these comedies are reflecting consciousnness or stagnation, Zimbabweans have been, I think in Southern Africa, we are the most educated country. Perhaps we have been. I don't know if we still are. But for a long time, our education system has been very good. It has been very good. Even now, under conditions of crisis, not that the system is good. It's just that people, they tend to be hardworking, maybe because of the crisis as well. So you often find that, you know, we tend to work harder and do better. So there is a consciousness in the population about what is going on. That is why people have been doing this. And then lastly, comedy as satire. Is there an alternative? You see, one thread that I see in all the comedies is that people are tired of the rhetoric. People are tired of political talk. What they want is for the politicians to walk the talk, to actually deliver on bread and butter issues. So in some of the comedies, actually see them suggesting what the politicians must be doing. Instead of talking about things, they actually need to begin to do them so that they can transform people's lives.
All right, thank you very much. Please, let's put our hands together for Dr. Samuel Boahen, Thembelihle Luthuli, and Dr. Rodwell Makombe. So please join us for reception in that corner. And just a reminder that on Monday we'll have the third in the series of this colloquium. And that is going to be on artificial intelligence, sexual minorities, and ritual dance in Africa. So please join us 2 p.m. on Monday, November 7th, here. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and